In 1972, for the first time in history, the pride of the United States Air Force, the B-52 strategic bomber, was shot down over the skies of Vietnam, sending shockwaves through the world's media. Not long after, Vietnam went on to shoot down a total of 34 B-52s, forcing the United States to sign the Paris Peace Accords to withdraw its forces with honor. What exactly happened? How could a small, war-torn, and underdeveloped nation like Vietnam accomplish what no other country has ever done? Many YouTube videos recount Operation Linebacker II, the campaign that marked this historic event. Beneath those videos, many comments claim that Vietnam was able to shoot down US B-52s thanks to Soviet assistance, particularly the SAM-2 missile system. But is that entirely true? Why did other countries, which also received Soviet weapons and support, fail to achieve similar results? This video will bring you the clearest answer. We will retrace how the Vietnamese military confronted the American B-52, from its first appearance in the war to the first aircraft shot down, and throughout Operation Linebacker II. These were fierce and grueling battles, revealing both the formidable power of U.S. air forces and the unwavering determination of the Vietnamese troops fighting for independence. All footage in this video is sourced from verified historical archives. This production does not seek to provoke or attack anyone, but to faithfully reconstruct historical truth. If you have any questions about the sources, feel free to leave a comment below. I'll be happy to discuss them with you. And now, let us begin the main content of the video. First, it is necessary to mention the great vision of President Ho Chi Minh of Vietnam, who judged that when the United States repeatedly delayed and altered provisions of the Paris Agreement, Washington would almost certainly introduce strategic B-52 bombers into the conflict to overwhelm firepower and thereby strengthen its bargaining position. On February 7, 1965, during the official visit to Hanoi by Soviet Premier A.N. Kosygin, President Ho Chi Minh asked the Soviet Union to assist Vietnam in building air defense missile units equipped with the SAM-2 system, and this request was approved immediately. As predicted, after a series of engagements with Vietnam, the United States realized that infantry operations and tactical airstrikes alone could not secure the initiative. In June 1965, Washington decided to deploy strategic B-52 bombers to the Southern Theater to destroy the bases and main fighting forces of the Liberation Army. With a service ceiling above 10 kilometers, a bomb load of up to 31 tons, and the capability to carry nuclear warheads, American military experts believed that the B-52 would certainly crush Vietnam's will to resist. At that time, the Vietnamese forces were able only to defend at low to medium altitudes, relying mainly on infantry weapons, anti-aircraft guns, and a number of obsolete MiG fighters that in reality could not reach the altitude of the B-52. Even after Vietnam received Soviet military aid including SAM-2 missiles, U.S. analysts still believed that an underdeveloped country newly exposed to modern weaponry would need many years to master such systems. Their plan was simply to bring B-52s to Vietnam, press the button, and then withdraw, confident that Vietnam could not withstand the bombing and would be forced to surrender. It was precisely this arrogance and overconfidence that would cost the United States one of the most disastrous defeats in its military history. On June 18, 1965, the U.S. Air Force formally launched about 27 B-52 sorties into southern Vietnam. In formation, each B-52 was escorted by F-100 and F-105 aircraft assigned to mark targets and lead the way. Facing the massive and sudden B-52 attacks, Vietnamese forces immediately deployed air defense missile positions, but every missile launch produced thick smoke and dust that allowed American aircraft to detect the locations from above and concentrate bombing, causing heavy losses to Vietnamese units. After many battles, Vietnamese commanders identified the cause, namely that enemy aircraft were fixing the coordinates of their batteries by observing dust plumes from the air. Exploiting that fact, Vietnam devised a countermeasure, creating numerous dummy sites and planting charges and mines at many points. And when B-52s appeared, they detonated the mines to produce false dust clouds. As expected, the Americans observed those plumes from above and bombed the indicated positions before returning. This method temporarily reduced actual Vietnamese losses. However, the U.S. Air Force quickly discovered the ruse. Furious, they changed tactics, used F-105 aircraft to disperse metallic chaff over the battlefield in order to jam Vietnamese air defense radar. After the metallic strips were released, the Vietnamese radar screens displayed only a flickering white wash that made it impossible to distinguish real targets from false ones. According to American calculations, about 25 strands of metal generated the radar return equivalent to one aircraft on the screen. Therefore, the more strips released, the more the enemy screens filled with ghost contacts that radar operators could not separate from real targets. If Vietnam had once used dummy batteries to deceive American aircraft, the United States now replied by creating a flood of false aircraft on Vietnamese radar. Observers of World War II will recognize that the British used a similar measure successfully against Germany. It is likely that the U.S. Air Force drew on that precedent. However, the Americans did not anticipate that the northeast monsoon was beginning to blow strongly at high altitude over the area where the B-52s were dispersing chaff. The strong winds scattered the metallic strips off course and rendered the jamming ineffective. Seizing the opportunity, Vietnamese air defenses regained the initiative and launched successive missile strikes that threw the United States into confusion. Yet that was only a tactical withdrawal, because Vietnam's ultimate objective remained the destruction of the B-52s. In 1967, the United States expanded its bombing range to areas close to the 17th parallel, concentrating its firepower on the strategic corridor of Vinh Linh, northern Quang Tri. This was a key position within the logistical network that carried supplies and reinforcements from the north to the south. The objective of the U.S. Air Force was to deploy strategic B-52 bombers over a vast area, destroying depots and assembly points while severing the supply routes to the southern battlefields. This time, the American B-52 formation was reinforced with EB-66 aircraft, which had the capability for active electronic jamming and could operate regardless of weather conditions. The EB-66 was often described as a B-52 without bombs, whose mission was to blanket the entire flight corridor with powerful jamming waves, blinding Vietnam's air defense radar systems. The United States was confident that under this protective umbrella of interference, the B-52 formations would be completely safe from Vietnam's SAM-2 surface-to-air missiles. On the night of September 17, 1967, the U.S. Air Force launched an attack formation consisting of 6 F-4 and F-105 fighter jets to pave the way, conducting reconnaissance while dispersing millions of fine metal strips to create false echoes on radar screens. Following them were 3 B-52 bombers flying at an altitude of over 10 kilometers. About 100 kilometers away, 2 EB-66 aircraft circled in an elliptical pattern, emitting strong electronic jamming signals to shield and protect the approaching B-52 formation over Vinh Linh. However, this time the Vietnamese side had prepared in advance. Missile battalions had been deployed along the anticipated flight path of the B-52s. Each battalion was equipped with P-12 and P-35 radar systems for target detection. Along with SAM-2 missile control teams, 2 battalions were stationed several kilometers apart, allowing them to cross-check radar data and accurately determine the flight direction of incoming aircraft. When the EB-66s began transmitting jamming signals, both battalions analyzed the radar returns, tracking only those interference spots moving at speeds consistent with B-52 aircraft. The slow-falling chaff trails carried by the wind were disregarded. At the same time, the Vietnamese Air Force dispatched 2 MiG-21 interceptors toward the EB-66 operating area. When the EB-66 radar detected the approaching MiG-21s, the EB-66s were forced to pull back from the B-52 formation to avoid confrontation. This separation weakened the jamming coverage, leaving parts of the B-52 formation exposed. Ground-based Vietnamese radar began to clearly identify the B-52's flight paths and directions. As the 3 B-52s entered missile range, the Vietnamese battalions immediately launched 2 SAM-2 missiles, each weighing over 2 tons. Moments later, a thunderous explosion echoed through the skies. A bright flash illuminated the night above Vinh Linh as one B-52 erupted into flames and crashed on the spot. The United States sought to reassure its pilots that this was merely a technical malfunction, yet anxiety spread within their ranks. Reinforcements were quickly dispatched, consisting of 6 F-4 and F-105 fighters equipped with Shrike anti-radar missiles. These missiles could automatically lock onto enemy radar emissions. Homing in the moment, a Vietnamese radar was activated. Observing that the United States maintained the same formation and tactics, Vietnam once again used MiG-21 fighters to separate the EB-66 from the main group. On the ground, when the Vietnamese missile units detected B-52s, they executed radar activation for only a few seconds, locking onto targets before shutting down to avoid detection by Shrike missiles. The tracking crews applied the half-angle lead method, not waiting for a full-body return but calculating the meeting point from course and speed, and firing 2 SAM-2s to meet the bombers on that projected line. Calculations showed that the V-750 SAM-2 traveled at approximately 750 meters per second, faster than the Shrike missile's speed of about 510 meters per second. This meant that if both were launched simultaneously, the SAM-2 could reach its interception zone first, significantly increasing the chance of a successful strike. To counter Shrike missiles more effectively, Vietnam also constructed numerous decoy sites in areas resembling real radar positions. These included wooden frames simulating radar antennas, mounts, sandbags, and dummy equipment that appeared identical to genuine installations when viewed from the air. When real radar stations temporarily went silent, small explosive charges at the fake sites were detonated to produce smoke and dust, misleading the enemy into believing that the actual radar positions had been destroyed. As a result, American aircraft concentrated their bombings on these decoy sites, while the real missile units remained intact and under reduced pressure. Ultimately, on October 20th, 1967, Vietnam shot down 2 B-52 bombers in a single battle. By the end of October, another was destroyed, and on January 11th, 1968, yet another B-52 was brought down. All of these victories took place in the region of Vinh Linh and northern Quang Tri, under the familiar formation of 3 B-52s, 2 EB-66, and 6 to 8 escort fighters. These triumphs marked a decisive turning point in the aerial confrontation between Vietnam and the United States, paving the way for even larger and more intense air battles that would follow. During the final phase of the Vietnam War, the most urgent objective for the United States was no longer to preserve the number of B-52 bombers, but to destroy Vietnam's air defense system, especially the SAM-2 missile complexes, which had caused the U.S. Air Force to suffer heavy losses. To overcome the limitations of the Shrike missile, the United States equipped F-4 and F-105 fighter aircraft with a new type of anti-radar missile, the AGM-78. This was a comprehensively upgraded version with a range of up to 90 kilometers, a warhead weighing nearly 100 kilograms, a speed of more than 600 meters per second, and most importantly, the ability to memorize the target's coordinates even after the enemy radar had been switched off. As long as the radar emitted a signal for even a brief moment, the AGM-78 could record its position and dive down to destroy the target. With that capability, the AGM-78 became the most dangerous radar hunter of that period. The United States also introduced into the battlefield the F-111 aircraft, a modern attack platform capable of flying at extremely low altitudes only about 70-80 meters above the ground, at a speed close to that of sound, and carrying up to 10 tons of weapons. The F-111 was assigned the mission of directly attacking air defense positions, paving the way for the B-52 formations flying behind. At that time, the United States had obtained a sample of the SAM-2 missile from the Middle Eastern battlefield, handed over by Israel after it had been captured from Egypt. Through analysis, they discovered that the greatest weakness of the system was its dependence on the communication link between the ground control station and the missile. If this transmission line was jammed or interrupted, the missile would lose control, veer off course, and fail to hit the target. Understanding this, the United States developed measures to jam precisely this communication frequency band in order to paralyze the combat capability of the SAM-2. In 1972, when the fighting in the Tri Thien region became particularly fierce, the United States was compelled to resume strategic B-52 bombing raids over the north, both to support the battlefield and to increase pressure at the Paris negotiations. The escort fighter forces were heavily reinforced, with close coordination among suppression, jamming, and bombing aircraft. Each formation of 3 B-52s was protected by between 11 and 18 other aircraft, forming an enormous block of firepower in the sky. This campaign by the United States had 3 major objectives. First, to test Vietnam's air defense capability after years of electronic jamming. Second, to force the mobile SAM-2 battalions to reveal their positions. Third, to create the impression that the formations of 3 B-52s with dense escort layers were impossible to shoot down as preparation for the massive bombing assault on the north that would follow. However, the Vietnamese side was not at all taken by surprise. To counter the F-111, Vietnam arranged low-altitude radar stations, combined with a network of anti-aircraft guns and 37mm cannons, forming an interwoven ground fire net that forced the F-111s to fly higher than planned when approaching. When the F-111s rose out of their safe ultra-low flight band, they began to fall within radar detection range and were locked onto by SAM-2 missiles. Within just a few months, numerous F-111s were shot down or disappeared without a trace in the skies over Vinh Linh and Quang Binh, forcing the aircraft once advertised as invulnerable to suspend operations in the Vietnam battlefield. The greatest problem at that time was how to prevent the United States from neutralizing the SAM-2 complexes. Vietnamese air defense engineers and operators quickly realized that the U.S. was jamming only within a fixed frequency band. The solution proposed was to change the communication frequency between the control station and the missile. According to a basic physical principle, the oscillation frequency of an electrical circuit is determined by the formula F equals 1/2 pi times the square root of LC. In this formula, L is the inductance of the coil and C is the capacitance of the capacitor. By changing either one of the two parameters, L or C, the oscillation frequency would automatically change. Understanding this principle, Vietnamese engineers carried out subtle adjustments right on the battlefield. They immediately contacted the Soviet Union to request permission to open the SAM-2 complexes in order to fine-tune the resonant circuits, and the Soviet side agreed. From then on, each Vietnamese SAM-2 complex operated on a separate frequency, rendering the American jamming system completely ineffective. As a result, from April 2 to November 22, 1972, Vietnam shot down a total of 9 B-52 aircraft. That result forced the United States to acknowledge that the tactic of 3 B-52s with heavy escort was no longer safe, and it prompted Washington to shift to the massive bombing strategy at the end of 1972. known as Operation Linebacker II? December 14, 1972. The White House officially approved Operation Linebacker II, Cambrian dak Linebacker. This was the largest aerial assault in the history of modern warfare, which the United States expected would determine the outcome of the entire war. Yet by this time, Vietnam had already mastered the tactics of fighting the B-52 through many engagements and was very confident in its plan. First, let us take a look at the forces that both sides had prepared before the battle began. On the United States side, the combat force involved was enormous. A total of 197 B-52 aircraft, consisting of B-52D and B-52G models, nearly half of the roughly 400 B-52s in the entire U.S. arsenal. The Tactical Air Force mobilized more than 2,000 aircraft, including F-4, F-105, F-111, A-6, EA-6A, and EB-66, ready to provide support and suppress enemy air defenses. The Navy deployed 6 aircraft carriers together with numerous command, cruiser, destroyer, and rescue ships offshore to ensure command and reinforcement. The 7th and 8th Air Divisions launched missions from bases on Guam and in Thailand, maintaining the continuous tempo of the campaign. The bomb and ammunition reserve exceeded 300,000 tons, enough to sustain several days of continuous heavy bombing. The operational goal was to force Hanoi to submit within a short period of time. On the Vietnamese side, the Air Defense Missile Force had 19 SAM-2 regiments, with more than 230 missiles, deployed flexibly and ready to maneuver. The Anti-Aircraft Artillery Force had 14 regiments, forming low and medium-altitude fire networks to protect key targets. The Fighter Air Force consisted of 3 regiments equipped with MiG-21, MiG-19, and MiG-17 aircraft, always ready to scramble for interception. The militia and self-defense air defense units were organized into thousands of teams throughout the north, participating in observation, alert, and low-altitude engagement. Radar surveillance systems were densely arranged around Hanoi, Haiphong, and Tai Nguyen to ensure early detection and fire control guidance. Missile positions were camouflaged and dispersed, capable of fighting independently and maintaining target tracking even under heavy jamming conditions. On the night of December 18, 1972, B-52 formations simultaneously attacked Hanoi and surrounding areas. Vietnam's air defense forces opened fire according to plan, shooting down 1 B-52 on the opening night, then consolidating and adjusting their tactics to focus on the tightly protected 3 aircraft formations. On the night of December 26, the enemy deployed its largest force of the entire campaign. The ground missile system maintained stable tracking, organized salvo launches, and achieved its highest results, shooting down 8 B-52s in a single night. From the night of December 27th, along with ground fire, the Fighter Air Force was assigned to directly attack the B-52s. Pilot Pham Tuan of the 921st Regiment took off from Hoa Lac in a MiG-21, was guided to approach at high altitude, maintained stable firing parameters, launched his missile at the proper range, and destroyed a B-52 over Hoa Binh airspace. This success confirmed that MiGs could shoot down B-52s in the air without needing coordination with ground-launched missiles. Applying that experience, on the nights of December 28 and 29, pilot Vu Xuan Tu approached a B-52 formation in poor weather conditions under intense jamming, without sufficient firing conditions, carrying out the order to shoot down as many B-52s as possible to force the enemy to end the campaign. He decided to ram his MiG-21 directly into the target, sacrificing himself and destroying the B-52. That decision demonstrated the highest level of determination of the Air Force in the final phase of the campaign. After 12 days and nights, the Vietnamese side shot down 81 American aircraft, including 34 B-52s and 5 F-111s. On December 30th, 1972, President Nixon was forced to order a halt to bombing north of the 20th parallel and accept returning to the Paris negotiation table. Operation Linebacker II, Malibra Triberischitztakt, ended in failure for the United States, which had to accept withdrawing its forces from Vietnam. What is difficult to understand is that the United States still kept the same tactic of using the B-52, only increasing the number and density of bombs instead of changing the method of warfare. So the Vietnamese side gradually grasped its operational patterns and organized effective interceptions. Perhaps the US believed that the massive amount of bombs would force Hanoi to surrender, but they underestimated the will and adaptability of the Vietnamese. It was precisely the persistence in using the old tactics that helped the Vietnamese perfect their method of destroying the B-52. Now, you have the answer to the question, why could Vietnam shoot down the American B-52? The entire video proves that if Vietnam had relied only on Soviet weapon support, it could never have defeated the US B-52s. A major part of that success lay in the determination, daring, flexibility in tactics, and willingness to sacrifice of the Vietnamese people for independence. If the United States had continued flying its B-52s, I fear that they would only have killed the last Vietnamese rather than made the Vietnamese surrender. In fact, Apart from the B-52s shot down by North Vietnam over the northern skies, there were others destroyed before they could even take off. When the bombing reached its peak intensity, the United States was forced to establish nearby bases for gathering, refueling, and rapid turnaround. They chose Utapao, a coastal airbase in Thailand, less than 1,000 kilometers from Hanoi, where around 20 B-52s were kept on constant standby. There, 2 North Vietnamese commandos secretly infiltrated and destroyed up to 8 B-52s right on the runway, a strike that humiliated the entire U.S. security system. The full story of this mission will be in the next video. If you're interested, please like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss it. Want me to tell more stories about the Vietnam-U.S. war? Leave a comment below. See you soon.